I have always enjoyed big screen entertainment, and for 2024 I set myself the goal of watching at least 200 movies. The first quarter of the year is over now, and I wanted to look back at what I've seen and reflect on both the ones I will definitely rewatch and the ones I am already forgetting. In my opinion, watching a movie is never a waste of time. The art of filmmaking plays a massive role in the times we live in and has had a huge influence on today's culture for many decades now. Here are 50 films I have watched so far, in no particular order. I will share my personal opinion on them, and it is personal for a reason. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and of course give recommendations. My goal is to start a constructive conversation among all movie lovers out there. Out of 50, I have seen 31 new movies and 19 that I had previously watched. Let's start with the ones I had already watched and wanted to get back into. Superhero movies I enjoy most of the time, but I think that in each of them there is one component that makes them better to the eyes of some more than others, and that is how much we know about them going in. The Batman, The Flash, and The Suicide Squad are all DC films I like a lot. Matt Reeves' take on The Dark Knight felt like exactly what I wanted to see, and I have very high hopes for the sequel coming in 2026. James Gunn's reboot of The Suicide Squad makes its predecessor look like it was put together in a day. He managed to make DC's dark world fun and brutal at the same time, which was very much needed after the Justice League disaster. The Flash, however, is a movie I have been waiting for 9 years. After many delays and controversies, it finally released last year and partly failed because of the terrible CGI. But my major complaint here is Ezra Miller. The Flash is a deep character, and I would like to see him played by someone who knows more about him, and especially that runs normally. I can't be the only person bothered by the way he waves his arms and legs all over the place. Why not run like a normal person? The movie was doomed to fail after all these years, but I think Warner Brothers managed to make the best out of it by adding Michael Keaton to the cast for his return as Batman. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Iron Man 1 and 2, Thor, and Captain America the First Avenger belong to the opposite universe and are just better movies overall. Marvel started the MCU back in 2008 with Iron Man, which was a hit, and the casting was of course on point. I would say that if you're not a comic book reader, you might not have heard of any of these characters before these movies, maybe except for Thor, but for other reasons of course. On the other hand, The Incredible Hulk did not deliver as expected. Edward Norton was out of the picture after this, for reasons I am not aware of, and Marvel was smart enough not to continue with the trilogy, unlike with other superheroes. Probably the audience was also not very interested in it because just a few years before the MCU was born, another Hulk movie was released in 2003, and the demand for a new movie was not very high. Moving on to other genres, I have rewatched two Italian movies I particularly like, Perfetti Sconosciuti and Quo Vado. The former is one of the films with most remakes in the entire world, having a German and a Spanish version and many more. The plot does not suggest that one country's culture is involved. It could be made in any language and take place anywhere. It would still make sense. I have seen, however, the German version as well, and the ending has been changed, which I think could start a very interesting conversation, but I won't spoil anything. Check if it's been made in your country, watch it, and then look up other versions, or watch the Italian one with subtitles as well. Let me know what you think. Quo Vado is among the highest grossing movies of all time in Italy. The protagonist is a stereotypical southern Italian dude, played by a very famous comedian who created him to mock us all. This one though is a heavily cultural movie. I believe that to enjoy it fully, one has to be Italian or at least have lived in Italy for quite some time to understand the adventures of Checco Zalone. 4 other movies have been released with the same actor and character, but are not connected to each other, which I also recommend checking out. The In-Betweeners movie 1 and 2 take us to a very different reality, England. These big screen adaptations are the result of a very brief but very funny TV series released in the UK between 2008 and 2010. Both the country of origin and years of release say a lot about it, as the jokes and situations are filled with a very dark humor, in a way that probably no one would dare to adapt today. In fact, an American version of the show has been made in 2012, but hopefully we all have forgotten about it by now. Let's move on to gory movies, such as The House That Jack Built, 300 and Halloween. 3 very different movies from each other. The first one, directed by Lars von Trier, takes us on a journey in the mind of a serial killer with a very unique goal in mind. I recommend doing some research on the ending, shouldn't you understand it fully. 300 is a Zack Snyder film that tells the tale of one of the most important battles in ancient history, and in 2006, when it was released, the way this movie was filmed was a revelation to me. Halloween was released in 2018, and it's a new take on the infamous Michael Myers and his story, continuing exactly 40 years after the original. I didn't like this one in theater the first time around, but the rewatch definitely changed my mind. Lastly, I have rewatched Doom Part 1 on the same day I went to the cinema to check out Part 2, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The last two are always fun to get back into. These are what I consider timeless movies for people of my generation. Moving on to new films for me and starting off again with superheroes. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was the only good one this time around. I had missed it in theaters because I was a little bit worn out by Marvel content, but decided to catch up on everything this year. I am not as big of a fan of the Guardians as others might be, but this was fun just like the others, and I appreciated the focus on Rocket, which is probably my favorite among them. I won't spend too much time commenting Morbius. This movie shouldn't exist, just like the rest of the Sony Spider-Man universe. We understand Spider-Man is successful and brings money in, but there's no need to make a movie about everyone. Eternals was very boring as well. Kind of a Justice League-like team that came from nowhere and started fighting each other. Thankfully, they are not investing any more money on this. I wouldn't be interested. I have to give credit to Marvel for kind of knowing when to stop with certain properties. Some older movies I checked out included Fargo, which let me down because my expectations were high. I don't know based on what, but maybe because I heard the TV series is very interesting. Dead Man and Django are 2 Western movies. I like the Western setting, but I never really watched any movies. After doing some research on where to start, these 2 got picked. I liked both of them and will definitely go back and extend my knowledge on the genre. I have to admit though, I am not a fan of black and white movies, especially the ones made purposely like that, like Dead Man. I think, however, it is important to watch some older movies to see the growth of the big movie stars that came to be in the 90s, like Johnny Depp. The Bone Collector as well stars very young Angelina Jolie and Denzel Washington. I was expecting more from this movie, but I will definitely give it a rewatch at some point. Bicentennial Man was a nice classic 90s movies with Robin Williams. I think the 90s were some of the best years of film because technology allowed filmmakers to adapt and create stories that couldn't have been done this well 10 years before. As I said at the beginning of the video, no movie is a waste of time for me. However, some of them come close to it. Unfortunately, I have watched some bad movies as well these past 3 months, but luckily there were only 2. Last Seen Alive and Lorafo. The former stars Gerald Butler in the role of a man trying to find his wife who gets kidnapped in a gas station. The movie is fine until it isn't. There is a specific point for me where it all came crashing down. Lorafo, though, is an Italian horror movie where some thieves rob the wrong old people. I will not spend any time on this movie as it is one of the worst I have ever seen. The plot makes no sense and the acting is horrible. I believe I could have made a better film on my first try. It's time to talk about an actor that has been coming up a lot lately, and that is Barry Keoghan. Besides Eternals and actually also The Batman, I have watched The Killing of a Sacred Deer, Saltburn and The Banshees of Inisherin. He started acting by responding to an ad for a commercial, and he's already at the top with Colin Farrell. I'm not sure if these movies were great or if I was just intrigued by his presence or peculiar face. Death on the Nile and The Haunting in Venice are Kenneth Branagh's sequels to Agatha Christie's novel adaptations of the adventures of Detective Poirot. They probably all need a rewatch, and especially some background with the books is needed, but I think the order in which they came out is also the ranking from best to worst. Maybe the book from which the latest film is inspired isn't as good, I don't know. Maybe make a couple more, but if this is the pattern, know when to stop. Moving on to some animation, I have seen Elemental and Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget. All of us need some cartoons from time to time, and Disney always comes up with some new, interesting stories and life lessons to share. I have to say though that Chicken Run came back over 20 years later with a great sequel. Usually it wouldn't make sense to go back to an animated movie like that, but it's almost like whoever thought of this didn't just wake up one day needing some extra money and bringing back a one movie franchise, but actually thought of this over the years and waited for the right time to bring it to life. Next up are two movies directed by the guy who is taking over modern cinema, Denis Villeneuve. As I mentioned, I have watched Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 on the same day. I was excited about the second chapter as I have heard a lot of good things about it on the days leading up to its release. This one is definitely an experience in cinemas, and I would recommend not missing it if you still have a chance. I am currently reading the first book as well. I wanted to know and understand more about this universe, which seems to be very complicated, filled with characters and storylines. I am very happy there is a new franchise we can be passionate about. There are too many remakes and reboots lately. We need something new. The other film from the same author I have seen is Enemy, and I love these types of movies. Unlike Dune, the plot here is very simple and there are only a handful of characters we need to look at and understand. When a history teacher finds his doppelganger in a movie, he starts being obsessed with meeting him and wants to know more. I think it's an intriguing story that will make you wonder what you would do in that position. Villeneuve is certainly hanging out with the top directors now, and I am looking forward to know what he has in store. Chalamet is back on this list with Bones and All by Luca Guadagnino. Not much to say about Chalamet, he's climbing the ladder alongside Villeneuve in Hollywood, but this film was good until it wasn't. I like these runaway love stories, but this one didn't get anywhere in the end. Nocturnal Animals I remember enjoying when I watched it, but I have completely erased it from my memories for some reason. Usually I can tell if I liked a movie months after I've seen it, because if I still think about it, it means it stuck with me, and this is not the case. It will probably need a rewatch. Manchester by the Sea, on the other hand, was a memorable one. Casey Affleck's acting made me feel like I was part of what was happening. Go watch it. It's time for international movies, in this case Asian. Old Boy is a Korean film recommended by many, but really didn't do much for me. I will for sure give it another try soon, but on my first time I didn't like it very much. Some shots were really good, but as for the story I didn't care for it. Moving a little further south, we know what Japan is famous for in terms of small and big screen. It was time to check out Your Name, and I did not regret it. A very romantic and deep story that only the Japanese could get right. Their form of entertainment is absolutely unique. This year I'm exploring more of the horror genre. My favorite type is and will always be slasher movies, but I am trying to get back a few years to check out what people were scared of back in the day. We have two more recent movies, Possum and The First Purge. Interesting story about Possum, I follow a page on Instagram that gives mini reviews about movies you may not know and doesn't mention the title of the film. I find it very interesting because it challenges you to decide what could be of interest for you, so you actively go look for it online. This was the case of Possum, but unfortunately I was let down. The atmosphere was on point, but the plot itself felt like it went nowhere by the end. The First Purge is the fourth movie in this franchise that at the beginning seemed like it was doomed to fail. I have to admit, however, that I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. The idea is very simple, and it seems impossible that one can make 5 movies so far and still make money. Two older ones I have checked out are Society and Night of the Living Dead. Both very good movies, but I think it is important to watch them with the eyes of a person living in those times. The latter is not scary if you watch it in 2024 for the first time, and even the story, it is something that now we have seen about 1,000 times. But when it came out, it must have been a game-changing film, and it still holds up today. Society is an 80s horror film which is meant to psychologically scare you, and it definitely manages to do it. I won't say much about it because I loved it, and for fans of horror it's a must. Go check it out. The final 3 movies on this list, starting with Poor Things. The first film I have seen in theaters this year, even though it's a 2023 movie. I went in very confused, and the first 15 minutes of the movie did not agree with me. But as the story was evolving, I started enjoying it more and more, and by the end I was satisfied, which was surprising since usually the opposite happens and films turn from good to bad. Whiplash was great. J.K. Simmons was scary and I wanted to punch him the whole time. Check this out, especially if you like music. Last but not least, we have Oppenheimer. I missed it in the cinema last year, but for those of you who know me, I like to collect physical movies and watch them at home, which is something I do more and more often. I had some bad experiences in cinemas where people just don't care about films and go there to hang out. I decided to wait for a 4K release and watched it at home in peace. Usually, the problem with this method is spoilers, but this was not the case. We've reached the end of this list of the 50 movies that I've watched so far in 2024, and I will take this chance to sponsor another project I am working on with a friend of mine, a podcast called Long Story Short. For those of you who know or want to learn Italian, we talk about a certain movie in each episode and start a conversation to see what we can find out by sharing opinions. Our latest episode is, in fact, about Oppenheimer, so go check that out if you have time. Thank you for making it all the way to the end, and I will see you soon to talk some more movies. Let me know what you've watched this year.